what is it, noon now? Afternoon? All right, well, good afternoon. Everybody have a seat, have a seat, have a seat. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about us. As Pastor said, yes, we are relationship experts, which means single, pre-married, and marriage. We have been working with couples probably about 15, 16 years. It started out in ministry, in church. I'm doing premarital classes and counseling and coaching. And I think, about 5, 6 years now? We've been doing it as a business. And yeah, we have about 4 books out now, and one of them was a bestseller as well. We're also licensed financial services advisors in about 9 states, and we have a team of other advisors because basically couples, we need to know about finances, right? We do. And so so the thing is that we have to make sure we're equipped and with value so we can give value. So we have to constantly, increase our value and our knowledge and wisdom so we can pour out to you as well.
One thing I can tell you is that God definitely has a sense of humor because we're preparing for the message, and I had everything kind of written out because I'm the type of person that I like to dot all my I's, cross all my T's. My husband, he's like, look, we just going to trust the Holy Spirit and we're just going to go. So that's a part of the relationship that we had to learn how to work together, how to flow together as a couple. And I was sitting there, and then God started changing some things. I was like, wait a minute, slow down, God. Now, I got my notes, and this is not lining up with what I'm supposed to say. But I started thinking about my husband, how he said, we're just going to flow and let the Holy Spirit have his way. So is that okay? All right. Now, one of the things, we are going to be talking about relationships, but Pastor Chris hit the nail on the head when he got up here and he started talking about the ultimate relationship that we can have is with Jesus Christ. And when he began to flow, I was sitting there. I was like, God, we don't need to say a thing. He said it all right there. So I just want to remind everyone, we're going to talk about the relationships and the dynamic. But don't forget, the ultimate relationship is with Jesus Christ. So we need to get that straight first before we can do anything else. Is that all right? All right, so we're going to be addressing 3 different phases of relationships. Oh, gosh. The first one is for those that are actively waiting. Actively waiting on God, meaning, hey, you don't have a boo thing, if I can say it that way, okay? All right. Now, we have this acronym what we like to share with people when we're talking to those that are actively waiting. And for those of you that are taking notes, it's 5 simple letters. So if you want to get your pen and your paper out, get your phone. I got to remember this is the technology age. Those days are gone where I used to have notebooks full of notes and notes and notes from church. I had one for every year, and now I'm like, Lord, just plug it in my phone because I don't know where those notebooks are.
And now we're finding them, all the notebooks from past, from
we moved
sermons and ministries.
Like 2 weeks ago, I started finding stuff from 2007, 2008. But that's why it's really important when God is speaking to you to write it down, because we start praying and interceding and be like believing God for things, and then when they come to pass, we forget. You know what? That's something I was believing God for back in 2007.
Right.
So you can kind of keep track, like, oh God, I thank you for this, I thank you for that, because some of these things we had kind of forgotten about, to be honest.
Yes.
And then when you see me, like, oh my God, thank you for that. Lord, I forgot we were believing you for X, Y, and Z. Because sometimes, as you get older, everything starts to change and transition. And you're like, oh, my God, I've been believing you for that since year, whatever. But that is a testimony. Because when you start going through those challenging times, you can start pulling out your notebook. And I know my son's looking like, okay, Mama, please don't do this to me. But when he and my daughter go through challenging times, and they get stressed out, I remind them, look at what God has brought you through before. So there's no reason in the world why you can tell me why you're going to doubt him now. When they said you couldn't do X, Y, and Z, you did it. When the enemy said no, God said yes. So whenever he starts speaking things in your ear, telling you can't do things, you can't accomplish things, that's when you start pulling those notebooks out and say, oh, yes, I can. God's going to bring me through those things. He's done it before. He's going to do it again.
Yes, and that's why we believe in providing the information in all multiple streams of platforms so people can receive this information, this wisdom and knowledge. And we try to reach the masses. So that's why we have books. We have audio books. We have digital books. We're on radio shows. We do broadcast all over the place. Because the thing is, this world needs this information about relationships. Because the world's relationship or definition of relationships is definitely not the true relationship.
Absolutely.
And now if we get back to in waiting now, and the thing is we're experiencing the same thing. Of course, if we can share a little bit about us before we get to like our kids. When we think about it, when we were single, now it was a little while because we've been together now 27 years.
Yeah, 27 years.
We've been married coming up on 23 years, right?
Yeah.
So it started out where I graduated from high school, right? Football scholarship. I came from Fort Pierce here to UCF. Here for about, UCF. 2 years playing football, and then I decided not to play any more football. I had to move down to Fort Lauderdale, and I started working at nighttime, and I went to school during the day. But now, I'm like away from my parents. I'm living with my sister, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy. So, talking about in waiting, I wasn't thinking about waiting. I was in the world. I was clubs, hanging out with my friends, having fun, wasn't thinking about no relationships. And then after 2 years going by of just trying to work and make money and just partying, my mom said, hold up, you down there in Sodom and Gomorrah. You got to leave South Florida. I got to get you in school. So she said, you're going to school. So I applied to FAMU and FAU. I got accepted to FAU, but for some reason I never got the acceptance. But I got accepted to FAMU. And I heard so much about FAMU. I'm like, oh, man, there's like 8 women to 1 man. So I'm like, oh, my God, yeah. But then I'm thinking, I'm going to find my wife at FAMU. So long story short, at FAMU, and I was backing up. I was just coming from the library, Coleman Library, and I was backing up in my car.
Honey, do you want to share with them what you were doing while you were in waiting? He talked about there was 8 women to 1 man, and he comes to FAMU. He says, I'm going to find my wife, but I'm going to enjoy all my 8 while I'm waiting.
And I'm going to try and get the next man if he don't want him. So I'm backing up, and I look to the left, right, and I see this beautiful woman, and I was like, oh, my gosh. But I saw that she had AKA on her shirt, so she was in this sorority, and I just assumed that sorority girls are all stuck up and prissy, right? But anyway, I said, I'm going to shoot my shot. So I go over to her, and I say, hey, excuse me, what's your name? And you said?
Absolutely nothing at first. And honestly, if I can be transparent, like many people, I had been through relationships before. I was hurt. I was burned. I was pretty much done with relationships. Actually, when I met him, I was fresh out of a relationship, and I had told God, I am done. I don't want to be bothered anymore. And God knew what type of person I was. I hadn't gotten to the saved part, I was still working on that part. So when I got up that morning, I heard, be nice to everyone you meet today, which I'm like, I'm kind of looking around like, what in the world? Maybe I'm just tripping. Okay. So I go to school. I'm coming out. Then, of course, here he comes, pulling up by me while I'm going to my car. I look on my car. There's a note on there, a note from one of the young ladies who, a long situation, coming out of a bad relationship, lots of issues. And what was it? A trigger. It got me back in a bad space. So here I am, all in my feelings and my emotions, and here he comes. He's ready, he's smiling, good looking, but I was in my feelings, didn't want to be bothered. So then when he backs up and starts to talk to me, what was I getting ready to do, ladies? Because I was in my feelings. I was ready to be like, you don't want none of this. Not today. I had attitude. But right before I did that, I heard again, be nice to everyone you meet today. Because while you are actively waiting, sometimes God is speaking to you. He's trying to get you in position to where he wants to take you. You can't be so caught up in where you are now. God's like, I know the plans I have for you. So don't get caught up in this particular season. You got to be ready to turn the page. The next chapter is coming, honey, but I need to get you ready. But I had to make sure that I was listening to his voice. So for those that are actively waiting, we have this acronym that we use. Because just imagine if I had not obeyed God, I would have missed my Boaz.
Now, before you go there, I just want to say this. So a lot of you, especially you young ladies and young men, you're waiting and you're looking, right? And sometimes we think, oh, that's the one. Well, me being at FAMU and before down partying all the time, I saw a lot of that's the one, right? Now, imagine if I had ended up with that's the one, I wouldn't be here, right? With the wrong one. So sometimes we're in waiting and we're anxious and we don't want to be alone. So we're like, oh, man, they look good. Ooh, they got a nice car. All these things that we're thinking, it's not necessarily what God has in store for us in a relationship. We're thinking about our own fleshly relationships, right? Now think about it. So I was dating and I saw her. It was something about her that stood out, right? So just if I had not said anything, if I was too intimidated to say hi to her, I would have missed these 27 years with her. Yeah. Right?
Right.
So what's the acronym, babe?
All right. The acronym is CLEAR. So for those of you writing notes, first thing you want to do, if you're actively waiting, you get clear. The C in CLEAR means get clarity on what you're looking for. Now, have any of you guys ever been in a 3D movie? And you know what happens when you go into that 3D movie, they give you a certain set of glasses that you need, right? Because you need a certain type of vision to be able to see what's going to be taking place, right? The same, if you don't use those glasses, if you don't have that vision, things are going to be blurry. They're going to be a little off. You're not really going to be able to understand what's going on, right? Now, the same thing that God is doing when you're actively waiting, he wants you to put on his vision through his glasses so you can see things. Because if not, things will be blurry. You'll be looking at somebody and you think, oh, that's Miss Right or that's Mr. Right. And no, they're right now. They're not Mr. Right and Miss Right. But you've got to have the right vision. You've got to get clear on what you want. Because we're running into relationships based on what we see on social media. This person's booed up. This person's going here and there. So then we start painting a picture for our lives based on what we're seeing in someone else's lives, not recognizing that God says, hey, this, that's their path, but this is your path. So don't get so focused on looking at what someone else is doing that you miss what God is doing right there for you. So while you're actively waiting, one of the first things you need to do is get clear on what you want.
Also, you want to be clear on who you are and where you want to go or where you should be going. Because a lot of times we're looking for someone to complete us, We say, I need somebody to complete me. We watched the movie Boomerang, something that might be kind of old, and he's like, I can't breathe without you. You complete me. Well, no, you need to be complete yourself. You need to know who I am. Okay, I'm Eric Hylick, and I'm a child of God, right? I need to know where I'm going, my purpose in life. Because sometimes we're still trying to find what we're going to do. What's my purpose? What's my mission? What do I want to do? Is it to work here or go there or make a career here or start my own business, or am I going to be a minister? Or am I going to be a pastor? You need to find out who you are first before you go try to join to someone else. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay.
All right. So the second letter, the L in CLEAR, stands for love yourself first. Too many times we're finding people while they're in waiting, they're looking for others to love them. They're looking for others to make them feel loved. And the first thing you got to do is love yourself. How is someone else going to love you if you don't love you? Think about what you're giving out. People, you're going to attract different sets of people to you, but some of these people that prey on you, they can sense someone with low self-esteem. They can sense someone that's struggling in different areas, and that's what you're giving off. And guess what? That's the people you attract. But you've got to love yourself. For women, recognize your value. Do not be afraid to walk away. Sometimes we spend so much time focusing on Mr. Wrong, he's occupying the space for Mr. Right. And it's more than just those relationships. We got to think about business relationships, family relationships. You've got to love yourself first. If that makes sense?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
All right.
So
then
what's the next one? E?
E.
Express what you expect.
Yes. Your potential partner is not a mind reader. If anybody is applying for a job, the job is not going to just drop in your lap, right? You're going to have to do some things. You're going to have to create a resume. You're going to have to apply. Of course, we all believe God for favor, but there are some things that you are going to have to do. So one is going to be express what you expect. A person is going to treat you how you teach them to treat you. And it's not like you're being controlling, but you've got to have love for yourself. You have to have your own set of values. You're going to teach somebody, okay, what's acceptable or not. And since my daughter's not here, I can use her as an example, and I won't get the side eye. She's in college now, and of course, you have young men that are going to try to date her. But when she was home, and I told her, I said, you've got to, she would tell me, oh, Mom, you know, this is what I saw on social media, and this guy has a girlfriend, this person. Okay, fine. But when a young man is approaching you, what's your expectation? Look at the things that he's saying to her, how he's treating her. Is that how you want to be treated? And she said, no. And I asked her, what are you looking for? Well, you know, I want him to come pick me up. Okay. Well, I want him to open a car door. Okay. I want X, Y, and Z. And what she had to learn in her communications with other, when he took her out, hey, are you going to open the car door? He's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. You express, that's what you expect. When they're talking to you and they start using profanity and all this stuff, say, hey, hold up. I'm not sure who you're accustomed to dealing with, but that's not acceptable to me. I appreciate it if you don't talk to me like that. And they're like, okay, cool. Now, if you're going to allow people to slide by and treat you any kind of way, that's exactly what you're going to receive. But when you start to express what you expect, they're going to recognize this is a different type of woman that I'm dealing with. I can't treat her any kind of way. I can't talk to her any kind of way. And the same thing for men. Do you want a woman that's going to talk to you any kind of way? That's going to treat you any kind of way? You want somebody that's always going to have their hands in your pocket? Yeah, say, hold up. You know, you got to establish some boundaries. And it's not teaching people to disrespect one another, but it's a matter of expressing what you expect. Using your communication. We have these mouths that we use for so many different things. We can use our mouths to praise the Lord. We use it in prayer. Why can't you tell someone so you can set the atmosphere for your level of expectation?
Now, if I could jump in here. Now, normally we teach a lot this in what we call a family structure, but it boils down to when individuals are raised up, is what they're exposed to, what they see, and what their environment presents to them, how they treat others. So men need to learn how to respect themselves, respect the woman, and then also got to move up into the stages, go from boy stage to manhood, right? And a man got to be able to take care of himself before he go to try to take on another. And then once you take on another and you can take care of yourself and you can respect them and you can love them the way you want to be loved, then you can move to husbandhood, right? Make sense? And then from husbandhood, we move to fatherhood. But as a father, we got to be able to teach those basics of moving from boyhood to fatherhood. Does that make sense? And the same goes with girls. Girls got to learn what it means to be a woman, respecting herself, and being able to respect the man before she can move to a wife. Got to know what it means to be a wife. Mm-hmm. But you know what? A lot of times we skip steps. Yeah. We go from boyhood and do something we ain't supposed to be doing, and now all of a sudden we're fathers, and she's a mother, and she hadn't even became a woman yet, and he hadn't became a man yet. Yeah. Now we skipped all these steps. We missed something. We haven't developed yet. We got to stay in line and learn those steps. But anyway, I don't know.
All right. The next part of the acronym is the letter A, which means allow yourself to heal from past hurts and baggage before you jump into a relationship. You have to heal. So many times you hear people saying, oh, that's my better half. No, you need to heal. You need to be whole when you're going into a relationship. Now, we tease each other and say, oh, that's my better half, but we know better. I had to be healed and whole, and he had to be the same. Because if I'm looking for him, you know, what if he falls? What if he's not doing right? Then I'm going to be jacked up. So I need to be whole on my own before I even attempt to get into a relationship. And the reason why I went into a relationship with him, God told me. So many times we're impatient. We're ready to jump into a relationship because of what we see on social media, what our friends are saying, what our friends are doing. When God's like, all right, if you jump into that relationship now, it's going to cause more damage than good. Now, when I met my husband, he was 24. Now, do you mindful? He said, I knew I was going to find my wife then. Imagine if I had met him 4 years earlier when he's partying and doing all kinds of things, and I attempt to jump in a relationship with him. He wasn't ready, and I wasn't ready. Now, can you imagine how much more damage we would have done to one another versus taking your time, making sure you're healed and you're whole, and then allow God to say, okay, this is the person you need to be with? Does it make sense?
Makes sense. Now, what we're talking about is singles, but we're actually moving into premarital.
Yep.
Because, got one more? Go ahead.
I got one more, which is the R. We talked about it a little bit more, but in getting clear, you resist the urge for someone else to make you happy. Too many times, we're putting that responsibility on someone else. Oh, this person doesn't make me happy. This person doesn't do this and that. Okay, well, that's not their responsibility. So many times we're giving our power and responsibility over to others. He's supposed to make me happy? No, okay, I got to have this relationship with God first. He's going to get me right, and then God's going to get him right, and the two of us together, it's going to make sense? But if I'm looking to him, I'm like pretty much ignoring like God's like, wait a minute, I got everything you need right here. You looking to him to do that? He's looking to her. We're all around the place, and God's just standing there like, anytime. I've been sitting here waiting on you. But we're going to everybody else, every other thing. We're looking for shoes. We're looking for hairstyles, looking to get her teeth straightened, teeth white, and all kinds of different things. Once this happens, I'll be happy. Once I date this person, I'll be happy. Once I get this house. But we're looking for too many things to occupy a space that God is supposed to be occupying.
That makes sense?
So for all of ours actively waiting, just remember that acronym. You need to get clear. CLEAR.
Clear.
All right.
Okay, let's move on to the premarital. So you found that someone that you think could be the one. But I would suggest that you go to our website, Marriages Can Win. Write this down, put it in your phone, Marriages Can Win, and go to Before You Say I Do. There's a checklist there. Before you say I do, there's a checklist there.
And the reason we're saying that, because a lot of times when we first got together, we did not have a positive image of marriage to follow. My mom married and divorced twice. His parents married and divorced 3 times. When my grandfather passed away at 94, he was on his 4th marriage. There was a history of that in our family. So we had to decide that we wanted to be the change that we wanted to see in our relationship. So many times we're just, following suit. This is what mama did. This is what grandmama did. That's what so many people did. And you're just following in those patterns, and they're not healthy.
Can I give a quick example on that? And
Absolutely.
This was taught by a pastor of mine way back. And he gave this example, right? So he looked to his wife, and he said, baby, why do you cook that turkey into 2 big pots on 2 small pots? She said, I don't know. Ask my mom. So I go and ask her mom, right? And she said, I said, well, babe, why do you cook these turkeys? You cut it in half and put 1 pot here and 1 pot here, right? She said, I don't know. Ask great-grandma. So go to great-grandma, and she go, I said, great-grandma, why do you cook the turkeys in 2 different pots? She said, baby, back in my day, we couldn't afford the big pot, so we just cut it up and put it in smaller pots and cooked it. Yeah. So now you got 3 generations cooking a turkey only because they saw mom, great-grandma, and cook it, but that's not necessarily the right and most efficient way. Make sense? So we look at our parents, and we're like, oh, that's how our relationship's supposed to be. That's how marriage is supposed to be. No, maybe back then, because maybe they grew up in civil rights and there was a lot of oppression and a lot of depression. So they had to do what they had to do to live. So you didn't see them hugging. You didn't see them kissing. You didn't see them doing certain things. But because of the times, for them, that was right. And it worked for them. Maybe, because maybe back then, and I looked at my grandparents, I was wondering why there was a bed here and then another room, a bed there. And I was like, well, aren't y'all supposed to be sleeping in the same bed? But back then, that was good for them, right? I can't cook the turkeys in two. Does it make sense? We just can't. Does it make sense? All right.
All right. So for those of you that are actively dating, we have a different acronym for you. We got the 3 R's. See, for me, it was hard for me to remember stuff. So I always had to come up with little ways that will help me remember stuff so I can apply it. Because I heard somebody say it's enough learning, it's time to start doing. So I had to come up with ways to help me remember stuff so I could actually start doing and start applying it. So for those of you that are actively waiting, you remember use a clear method. But for those of you that are actively dating, we got the 3 R's for you. Okay? All right, so the first R is be receptive to a mindset. If you're actively dating and you're seriously considering marriage, you have to start developing a mindset shift going from I or from me to we. Because remember, there's no I in team. So when you're actively dating and you're seriously considering getting married, there's a mindset shift that has to take place. Because remember, when you're dating, sometimes you're going from the girlhood phase, trying to get to the woman phase. Then when you want to shift from a woman phase to a wife phase, that's a different mindset shift because you no longer just think about me. There are 2 of you now in the relationship. There's someone else whose feelings you got to consider, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. And the thing is if we just, you know what, if we just really read the Word of God mm-hmm. and just go by what it tells us, it is the blueprint for an awesome relationship, awesome marriage. And the 2 commandments that he said is to love thy neighbor as we love ourselves. Mm-hmm. Love him with all thy heart, thy soul, and thy mind, right? So if I'm going to love her with all my heart and my soul and my mind, and she loves me with all my heart and my soul and my mind, nobody's getting left out. Does that make sense? Because I'm not going to mistreat her because I wouldn't want to be mistreated. I'm not going to lie on her because I wouldn't want to be lied to. Right? I'm not going to cheat on her because I wouldn't want to be cheated. I'm not going to steal from her because I wouldn't want her to steal from me. That makes sense? Basic, one-on-one, the Word of God. But also, when you go to that page, I know we were on the R's, but the communication piece is really important now because what we're trying to do, and I may be skipping a step, so forgive me.
That's okay. I'm used to working with you. It's good.
We want to make sure that this person, because we're thinking permanently about a lifetime situation, we want to make sure that this is a person that I can build a life together with, right? We're talking about building. We got to communicate. It's almost like interviewing for a job. You want to make sure you got the right person for the job. Mm-hmm. So you got to find out about this person. Communication is the key in this. You got to find out, well, number 1 on that list is, well, what kind of religion do you practice? And if it's the same, good. But if it's not, well, which religion are we going to be practicing in our marriage? Are we going to have kids? If so, how many? And then, what are we going to teach our kids about religion? Make sense? So then we got to think about the finances.
Remember this, oil and water don't mix. So if you're a Christian and you're dating a Muslim, that is going to be an issue.
So you put the water in the cup, right? And then you pour oil, they're going to separate. Mm-hmm. And we know the symbolic of the Holy Spirit is water, right? Yeah. Out of my belly flows rivers of living water. So if we're both of water and we put a cup there, I pour the water in, me into the cup, her, the water in, it mixes and becomes one. Make sense? So that's why it's important. Communication, finding out things.
So the next R, and this is really, really important. I need you to make sure that you're recognizing red flags. And not only recognizing, do not ignore them. Oftentimes when you're actively dating and you want to get married, you ignore the anger issues. You ignore the financial mismanagement. You ignore those little red signs. Oh, he didn't mean that. Oh, she didn't mean that.
Because you're
No.
too busy thinking about how fine they are.
Yeah, and that's true. You get in relationships like, oh God, he's fine. Well,
Oh,
tell
I
me.
don't want to be alone.
Or they say, well, what does he want to do at school? I don't know. So many questions. I don't know. You're just so busy staring at them. They're staring at you, and you're sending the text messages, and you get these giddy feelings. But what's beyond that? Where are they now? Where are they aspiring to be? Have some serious conversations. I've had so many young ladies come to me, and they start talking about these red flags, and I'm like, okay, well, is this something new? Well, he did that before, but I just assumed. No, don't assume anything. Start having these conversations. Ask them questions. Find out about their relationship with their family. If you're planning on spending the rest of your life with someone, you need to know what kind of relationship does he have with his mother? If this person has a horrible relationship with their mother, they're disrespecting their mother, what do you think is going to happen? Exactly.
Right. Yeah, and that's why you need to find out more about them and what they think about the marriage road. Because now, I mean, it was surprising. I was on this other social media, Clubhouse, and I was new generation, actually around your ages. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people are like, well, they're talking about relationships. They say, well, we don't subscribe to the patriarchal systems mm-hmm. of what, society. And I'm like, what's that? Oh, that you got to get married. Right? Then they're like, well, that's according to the word. And well, we don't subscribe to Christianity. I'm like, what? Blowing my mind. I can't see, so you need to find that out because you said that you may have fun, go dating, and you have fun, you go out bowling or whatever you're doing is fun. And then you find out they don't even believe in marriage or they don't even believe in God. Yellow flags turn into red flags. Don't ignore the yellow flags.
All right. Well, this leads me to my third point, which is resist the urge to compromise. Because what we do, we find ourselves in a place, well, my friends are getting married. My friends are having kids. My friends are settling down. My friends are doing this. My friends are doing that. So then what do? I don't want to be by myself. I've had several young ladies, well, I'm tired of being alone. I understand that. But I'd rather you be by yourself and in a good space than with somebody that's making your life miserable, or there's someone that you're not called to be with. You're giving them time and space that should be given to someone else that's going to love you, that's going to respect you, that's going to honor you. So many young ladies, and I listen, my daughter, she's in college now, and she'll call me and she'll tell me, she's like, Mom, I had this conversation with this young lady, and I didn't know what to say, and she was telling me how the young lady was calling her, and she was crying because she thought she was in love with the young boy, and she did some things that she knew she shouldn't have done. And he's like, now he won't even call her anymore. Don't want anything to do with her. So she's crying. She's crestfallen because she compromised. Because she was saying, I didn't want to be by myself. I didn't want to, all my other friends are doing this. And I'm, they're teasing me. They're making fun of me. And she said, Mom, I really, only thing I could do was just give her a hug and tell her I pray for her and just encourage her. Because there's some decisions, once you've made that decision, you can't take that situation back. So it's just something to be mindful of. And this is not a doom, gloom, because you're actively dating. These are just some words of wisdom for you to keep in your mind so when you're actively dating.
So if you can avoid some of the hurts and the heartbreaks on the way to finding the one that you're going to build your life with, I think it would behoove you to not ignore the yellow and the red flags so you can avoid those. So, so the one that you're going to build life with is the one. So that's why you need to communicate and take your time because there's a lot of heartaches that you can avoid just by really taking your time and communicating. And, I won't go too much. Go ahead.
All right. I'm going to share this story really, really quick. I hope he doesn't look at me funny. But remember when I told you when I met my husband, I was done. I was frustrated because I'd come out of a bad situation. Suffice it to say, I had allowed myself to get, what do they call it, in an entanglement? That was the way they called it? No, entanglement or situationship where I was dating a young man. And because, hey, he was, we were both going to, interested in medicine. And, you know, he's an attractive guy. We had class together. He's really, really smart. And I'm like, okay, this is the one. And then I started ignoring the red flags. You know, how he disappeared for days. And then when he come around me, I'm like, what's that smell on you? It smells like weed. I just started ignoring, and I'm not judging anybody. But what I am saying is there were so many things going on. And then I had to start noticing some of the times he would disappear, and my roommate would disappear around the same time. Yeah. Yeah. So suffice it to say, literally, God spoke to me again. I was at school, and I just got this urgent class. Go home now. Why do I need to go home now? Go home now. So I pack up my stuff, go home, go to my dorm room. And my room, it was 6 of us, 6 women in one apartment. And my other roommates were saying, we were sitting here praying that you would come home. And I'm like, what's going on? He just left here with her. And I was like, so sometimes God is sending red flags your way. And I'm not saying this to put my business out there, but I'm saying it because as a young woman, sometimes we find ourselves in situations. We find ourselves, there are red flags going on around us, but because we don't want to be alone, because we want to be like everybody else, because we want our social media to look like everybody else, and we want the likes and all this other stuff, we start to compromise. We start to ignore the red flags, and God is like, I'm sending you message after message after message. What do I have to do to get this through to you? Now, as a woman, I'm speaking to the women, and I'm sure there are red flags for the men. But I just want you to be mindful of that. When you're actively dating, when God starts giving you those red flags, pay attention.
Yeah, let me jump in here and talk about the men, because we men, we're sight stimulated. We see a beautiful woman. Like I said, I saw a beautiful woman, right? And I was talking with her. And the thing is, you know, we had our first date on Valentine's Day, 27 years ago. So Valentine's Day. And, you know, it was kind of funny because, you know, she called me at odd hours of the night and say, hey, what you doing?
I was testing him. I wanted to make sure there weren't any red flags, right?
She's like, come get me. I'm like, okay. So I get her and we go to the lake and we sit there, just talked for hours and hours to like, oh, I don't know. And she had a test the next day. We just talked and talked. And during that talking, I found out so much about her, you know, her background, her family, where she wants to go in life and what she wants to do. She had plans. So I'm thinking now, I'm like, oh, if I'm going to build, you know, I'm thinking this is building material here. And I wasn't even thinking, oh, I'm looking for a wife, but I'm thinking, okay, she's the real deal. She's pretty, she's fine, she's intelligent, and she wants to go somewhere in life. I could work with this. She was telling me all about, she wanted to get her MD, PhD, how she wanted to go to Emory, and she was going to be an anesthesiologist. She was telling me all about her dreams and aspirations. Now, I'm going to back up. Men, we got to be able to create a safe space for the woman so she can trust you and feel safe about opening up her heart, her dreams, her aspirations. So she'll tell you things that you would never know about her. And you'll find out about her inner being, not just the outer being. Because we always thinking on with our eyes, but now we're finding out, wow, she feels safe with me. And she's revealing herself, her feelings and emotions. So that's when we got to look for a woman, because you don't want a woman that, okay, yes, she's beautiful, but she has no intelligence. She doesn't want to go anywhere in life. She's looking for you to take care of her or whatever. If you're looking to build something in life, build and protect wealth, build a family or businesses or what have you, you need to find out if this woman is that woman that you want to join to. Make sense? Because you don't want to, I've spent many a days because I'm looking at the outside appearance and come to find out the next day, I go on another date, she dumb as rocks, has no aspirations, no goals in life. And I'm like, I can't work with that because I got goals. And then I find out more what God has in store with me, for me. So, communicate.
Yeah. And there's just one more thing for those of you that are straddling the fence trying to decide, is this he the one or is he not the one? Let me ask you this. Is this person drawing you to God or drawing you away from God? Are they drawing you to God or away from God? Because so many times we're like, oh, he's good looking, he's got X, Y, Z. But when you start talking about things, he's like, no, you don't need to do that. Let's go to the club. Wait, what? No. Well, you don't need to do that. Let's go here. Let's do that. And you start to feel uncomfortable. Sometimes that's God's letting you know you're going to be uncomfortable in some situations, because sometimes God's like, I'm going to make you so uncomfortable that you have to leave, because this is not where I want you to be. So just be mindful. God is always speaking, but are we always listening?
All right, so where are we on the premarital?
We finished the premarital.
Okay, so let's move to the marriage. So being married, right? We found, and actually our first
4 C's.
4 C's.
Yep. For the married folks, we got 4 C's. So for the actively waiting, we got to get clear. For actively dating, you got the 3 R's. But for those that are married, the 4 C's. That makes sense, all right? And we're going to break it down. Go ahead.
You go ahead. Go ahead and tell them the 4 C's.
No, you go ahead, baby.
Well, I was just going to tell you, because our first book, we've done the research and we've actually experienced it. We found that the biggest issues in relationships that causes them to fail and marriages to end up in divorce is communication, finance, and intimacy. Mm-hmm. And so that's why our first book, we even have a workbook to give you assessments to let you know where you are in your relationship. Mm-hmm. Because we've worked with people of all ages, in the 20s and the 60s. And you can imagine, we had one, let's talk about the one that, the 2 older couples. Yeah. They're in their 60s. They both have been married 3 times. Mm-hmm. And one lived in California, and the other one lived here in Florida. And she was like, okay, you ready to pack up and move to California? And he's like, no, we staying here in Florida. You just got to sell your house. Wait a minute, they done got married, been on a honeymoon, and now they just now discussing where they're going to live.
There are certain things that people often take for granted. Now, be mindful. We're sitting here and we can laugh about this now, but imagine sitting across the table from that couple. They're in their 60s. They've both been married. This is like their 3rd marriage. And what are they coming up with? They had not communicated at all. Sometimes you're like, ooh, you're happy to have somebody, but okay, what's going on? When you start talking about getting married, did you start having those necessary conversations? So when we talk about communicating, have you ever thought about it like this? We're always talking about it's important to communicate with God, right? But communication is a 2-way street. We're talking and someone's listening. Because you ever go to God, X, Y, Z, God, I need this, and this. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to use myself as an example. When we were in a season of our lives, we went through this season where we were butting heads. We were not getting along. So you know what my husband told me to do? He said, you need to go pray. And I looked at him like, whatever. You don't need to tell me what to do. But what did I do? I went in the bathroom and prayed. And I said I was going to communicate with God about this man that he gave me, how he was hard-headed and wouldn't listen. So I was going in that bathroom every night telling God about this man that he had given me and what he needed to fix in this man and why he was wrong. So I kept this. How many of you realize that wasn't really communication? That was just me talking and venting, because I wasn't doing any listening. God was sitting there like, okay, anytime you're ready to hear what I have to say, just close your mouth and listen, because communication is a 2-way street. We say something, and then we listen. It's a back and forth thing.
Now let's go ahead and give these strategies.
Okay.
Because you're going into the strategy.
Okay, I got it.
So number one, here's some strategies for communication, right? Number one, if you can't verbally communicate, then stop and write it down. Mm-hmm. If it's an issue in your relationship and you find yourself getting high emotions, and you're starting to get into the yelling, your voice is changing, safe word, stop. Because you got high emotions and low intelligence. Right. When your emotions are high, you're not thinking about what you're saying. So you may say hurtful things that hurts the other person. So stop, safe word. So now you got to go into conflict resolution. So both of you go to your corners, get your pen and paper, start writing down, well, this is the issue I have. The top issue, number 1. Top issue, number 2, right? And then same thing over there. Now, you come up with 2 ways you want this resolved. 2 for the first one, 2 for the second one. Same over here. You come together, and you present your solutions to the number one. You agree to try those solutions, and then if it worked, great. If you didn't, go to the second one. Make sense? And then you do the same for the other person. So that's if you just can't, if you find yourself always screaming and yelling at each other, stop, right? All right, tip number 2.
All right. Well, one of the reasons I just want to remind you, when we talk about that, you notice that one person's talking, the other person's listening. You're writing it down, and there's a back and forth. There's a dialogue. So both of you have a vested interest. Because many times in relationships, we find ourselves, one person's getting angry and resentful because they feel like I'm always apologizing, I'm always coming up with the resolutions, I'm always X, Y, Z. But when you practice that conflict resolution, both of you become involved. Both of you come up with suggestions. Because if you think about it, he might come up with a solution that you never even thought about. I had to learn, and many wives have to learn, our way isn't always the right way. He has valid points. His thoughts are just as valuable as mine, and he comes up with some creative ways, and sometimes you're like, I didn't even think about that. You know, that's a good idea. Why don't we try that? And now guess what? Now he recognizes you value his input. You value him as a person, so now he's ready to come to the table, and let's hash this out. Versus you turning him away and him feeling like, my opinion doesn't matter. I just got to do what my wife says. Makes sense?
Strategy number 2, repetition. Repetition. This is going to bring clarity, okay? Because my wife will tell me, baby, I need you to come pick me up today at 5 o'clock on 12th Street. Okay, she happens to come when I'm in my favorite TV show, and I'm all into it, right? So if I just say, yeah, baby, and then, you know, I'm supposed to pick her up and I forget to pick her up, she's going to be really mad at me, right? So I need to stop. I said, okay, repetition. So I think I heard you say you want me to pick you up today at 12 o'clock on 12th Street?
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, well, so there you go. Now, I wouldn't have made a mistake. So I gave her an opportunity to clarify what I said, and then I can get right what she said. So now she feels more comfortable that he actually listened to me and not give her the Charlie Brown syndrome. But she could be talking, and all I hear is wah, 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 wah. If anybody's seen Charlie Brown, and you know, you always hear wah, 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 wah. So that's men, we think that's what we hear when a woman's talking. So in order to avoid that, I got to use the repetition. I got to make sure I know what she said, so I was actively listening to what she said. Make sense? All right, go ahead.
All right. So the second point for those that are married, we talked about communication, but the second one is committing to guard your marriage against external influences. Committing to guard your relationship against external influences, which means you have to establish boundaries. Once the two of you get married, you know, they say you leave your mother and your father and you cleave to your wife. That's for a reason. You've got to create your own relationship. When you start getting input from so many different sources, now mind you, what did I say? My mom's been married and divorced twice. His parents been married and divorced three times. Grandfather married and divorced 4 times. So then, imagine if we don't establish those boundaries within our relationship and you start bringing all of this baggage from the past and what they're saying you should do into your relationship, you're going to have complete and total chaos in your home. Now, how many know God's not the author of confusion? So what do you need to do? You need to make sure that you have peace in your home. So that means establishing boundaries.
Make sense? All right.
All right.
Yeah, next.
You sure you don't want to have anything to say? Because you know I'm getting
We don't want to be getting that outside influence from people who don't have a track record of success in their relationships, do we?
Yeah. You need to determine who's qualified to speak into your relationship. I love my family to death, but if there's a challenge in my marriage, I know who not to go to.
For the football scenario, right? In the NFL, when they hire a coach, they're looking at his track record. So if they've been to the Super Bowl twice, they got a winning record, I'm going to hire them. But then if you got one that's got an 0-16 record, I'm not going to listen to them. They're not going to come and coach me, right? So I'm not going to talk and listen to my parents when they've been married and divorced 3 times.
All right. The next C is constantly walk in forgiveness. And why do we say that? Because we're all imperfect. If you sit there and think about the number of times God has forgiven us when we have messed up, we've done things over and over, and God's saying, I told you not to do that. I told you not to connect with that person. I told you not to do that business deal. I told you not to be friends with that person. Oh, God, I'm so sorry, God, I'm so sorry. And he forgives us time after time after time. But then your mate makes a mistake. They don't put they don't put the toilet seat down. They don't take out the trash, or they leave their clothes in the corner. And all of a sudden, you're on this rant where you can't forgive them, like we're all perfect. So if you start thinking about that, now I understand sometimes people may do some really outlandish things. Forgiveness is not for them; it's for you, because you start hindering your prayers when you're so focused you can't forgive them. Think about all the times God has forgiven you. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. But you've got to learn to let that stuff go. Do you know how harboring unforgiveness can impact you physically, can impact you emotionally, can impact you spiritually? So holding on to that anger, that frustration, is it really worth it? When we start seeing people with high blood pressure, cancer, and all kinds of stuff, that's because the stress and anxiety, they're harboring unforgiveness sometimes. So learn sometimes to let it go. And I understand nobody's perfect. Yes, they may have ticked you off. I'm not expecting you to say, oh, ha, ha, Pollyanna, or something like that. It may take some time, but understand you have to be intentional about walking in forgivenness.
Now, let me interject real quick, too, now. Forgiveness does not mean ignore and give them a pass. Because if that person, if they said they're going to change, action actually shows the change. If they're just verbally saying, yeah, I'm going to do better, I'll just, forgive me, and there's no action, there's no effort, that's a different story. Make sense?
And our last C is control your finances. Finances is one of those top categories that tears relationships apart. And my husband and I laugh about it, but with the pandemic, you hear a lot of people talking, husbands wondering why all these Amazon packages are popping up for my wife all of a sudden. Where these extra shoes come from? Now, I'm picking on ladies because I'm the first one to be guilty. Since the pandemic, it's like Amazon was at my door almost every day. So I had to learn to slow down. He's like, look, come on. And the reason why I say that, God is so good in the midst of this pandemic, and we shared this on an interview. I had been a pharmacist. I'm now retired. It's been 20 years working as a pharmacist. And I got sick a couple years ago. Started having some severe breathing issues, and I could not go back to work. Now, how many of you know when you have a certain level of income, sometimes you have a certain level of bills, but then when you get sick and that income drops from here to here, you can get a little concerned, can't you? Or it's just me. I'm the only one that worries about bills. Oh, okay. So suffice it to say, the pandemic happened. Do you know God loved me enough to remove me out of that situation? I talked to other pharmacists, and they were telling me, we don't have masks, we don't have gloves, we don't have hand sanitizer. So imagine me in the midst of a pandemic trying to serve my patients, and I'm struggling to breathe myself. I don't even have the equipment. So sometimes we get frustrated, and we wonder, God, why is this happening to me? Because God knew I wasn't going to walk away from that job and that salary on my own. So there's a predicament where he said, look, I'm going to make it so uncomfortable, you have to go. So instead of fussing and complaining about what I didn't have, I started thanking God for what I did have. So I don't know how many of you saw that interview. During the pandemic, and I can share it now, it was months ago, my entire family, with the exception of my husband, we were all diagnosed, they were COVID positive. Now, someone that has asthma, that was particularly stressful for me. Because if I were to get COVID, that could really, that was pretty much, I don't want to say, that wasn't a good thing. I'll put it like that. So when we got our test results, my daughter, she's in the back of the car trying to be strong, and she breaks down crying. And, of course, I don't want to scare, I don't want my son to get worried. So during the midst of that, we had a conference for married couples, doing what we're supposed to do. And on the last night of that conference, my husband had to rush me to the emergency room because I was having difficulty breathing, and it was unlike anything I had experienced before. And, they told us, we were positive, but eventually they discharged me, brought me back home, and I kept coughing, whatever. Stopped breathing. The only thing I could remember were the words of my husband over saying, God, it's not her time. My life does not work without her. So what I want to tell you, when you get into these relationships, you have to make sure that it is someone that you can trust, someone you can trust with your life. Now, mind you, I've been a pharmacist for 20 years, but they had to come and show him. Every month, he had to come and give me a shot to help me continue to breathe. So just because this person is fine doesn't mean that's the person I'm going to trust with my life. So I want you to be mindful that when we think about finances, those shots that I had to get, $3,000 a shot. $3,000. So when I'm thinking about finances, $3,000 or breathe, $3,000. So you have to control your finances, because that's a huge thing. When you go from this level of income to this level of income, but all of a sudden something happens to you physically, and you got to believe God for $3,000 or for the insurance company to pay for those shots every month. Be mindful of that. So when we talk about controlling your finances, we urge every couple, whether you're just getting married or you've been married for a period of time, control your finances.
If I can jump in, the communication aspect. Communicating about your finances. This is something you need to talk about in that premarital stage, but now you're in the marriage stage, you still need to talk about it. You need to be able to, like I said, you find someone you can build and protect wealth. You need to talk about, especially with children, if they want to go to college, how we're going to save for college. If you want to talk about vacations, how we want to save for vacations, where we're going to live, what kind of cars we're going to drive, what kind of lifestyle, how we're going to retire, right? If you have newborns, that's the best time to save, and that's why you want to talk about your finances. And that's what we do. We work with couples. We work with individuals. And I was just talking with one of our clients the other day. They have a 17-year-old. And I was actually on a men's, not a conference or a webinar. And the host was like, hey, you talked about how you build and protect wealth. And, I want to know more about that. And so I shared with him, even with his 17-year-old, where his 17-year-old in 10 years can have like $60,000 where he can pull out of his insurance. And then if he wants to buy a home, he can pull that money out of his insurance policies and go buy a home, and it can be tax-free. By the time he turns 37, he can have over $100,000 in his insurance policy, and it's like risk-free. You don't lose any money if the stock market goes down. And then when he turns 60, he can pull out $55,000 tax-free for the rest of his life, and living off of the insurance policy. But he gets 3 benefits from this. He gets cash value, he gets living benefits, and he gets a death benefit. Living benefits, so if you get sick, like my wife explained, and those bills come in, well, if you got the old insurance, it's just a term insurance, you can't go and pull any money out of it. It has no cash value. The only way you're going to get money is by dying and leaving it to your beneficiaries. But term is only for a certain amount of time. You got 10, 20, and 30 years. So after 30 years, you think, I got insurance. 31 years, something happened to you, nobody gets anything. You just made an insurance company rich. So when I told him that, he was like, wow, I did not know anything about that. And he's like, how can I find out about that? And I was like, well, here. So I gave him some illustrations, and now he and his whole family are doing the same thing. So it's going to protect them. So critical, chronic, or terminal illnesses, you can go into your insurance policy and pull out 90% of your insurance. So imagine if you got a $200,000 life insurance policy. You can go in there and pull that money out and take care of your expenses while you're still living. Make sense? So talking about it, but not only talking about it, but doing something about it. Because, I've so many times when I see on Facebook when people got GoFundMes because somebody passed away and they can't afford to bury them. Or it's time for going to school and they have they're struggling to get scholarships or money. So especially with these young couples, when you have a child, now imagine you get one of these insurance policies called Index Universal Life Insurance. By the time your child turns 16 years old, you can have maybe $80,000 or $100,000 in that insurance policy. You can go and pull that money out, pay for your college education tax-free. When they graduate, your child now can pull out money and go buy a house with it, tax-free, right? And then later, maybe she wants to go on vacation 5, 10 years later, pull out another $50,000 or $60,000 out of a life insurance policy and go on vacation tax-free. Mind you, if anything happens to that person, they have a death benefit that takes care of the family. So when there's bills left, your family's not struggling. You got to talk about these things. It's not the best thing you want to talk about, but when it happens, you wish you had talked about it. This is how wealth is left to people who know about it. As they say, the 1%ers. But no, everyone in here needs to start talking about it, having a conversation about how do we take care of ourselves if we get sick, especially when you're getting married. This is a conversation that you have to have. How are we going to take care? If I'm the primary breadwinner, what happens to me? What happens to the family? Because the best thing you can do is to take care of me. And as the man, we got to be visionary. We got to think about our family, taking care of our children, taking care of our wives. That's why going from the boyhood to the manhood, I got to be able to notice wisdom. I got to be able to take on a wife. I got to be responsible for my wife. I got to be responsible for my kids. This makes sense? So talking about finances, talking about communication, talking about intimacy. So when you get that person that you find you want to build your life with, now you know about them. And I laid this book. It's called Struggling to Keep the Vows. Think about it. When you say your vows, the typical vows is through sickness and health, through the good times, the bad times, and through the richer and the poor. Well, we've been through all of those. Ooh. And when she was, I'm glad you didn't go to that point, but the point where she was talking about, I thought I had lost my wife. When she had COVID and she said she couldn't breathe, I thought she was going to leave me. So all I could do was cry out to God, and he answered my prayers. But thing is, she knows that I'm there for her. It's not a shallow love. It's a heartfelt. When you say those vows, you say that before God. You got to deal with the richer, the poor, the better, the worse, through sickness and in health. If you got this beautiful person and they rich, and all of a sudden they get in an accident and you have to take care of them the rest of their life, can you do that? And will you do that? Or are you going to leave them at the first sign of trouble? Does that make sense? This is real stuff, guys, when you're talking about marriage and being with a person for the rest of their life. You don't want to be another statistic in the divorce range, or you don't want to be the single person all your life, because you made wrong decisions. Also, communication, what we forgot to do on the third communication tip. It's a two-way street. Communication is not you always talking. It's close your mouth and listen. It's two-way. And that's the same thing with God. We always, God, I need this, God, I need this, God, I need this. Hush. You give him the glory, you give him thanks, and you give him the praise, and then you hush your mouth and you listen. Every time you get in his presence, if you stop talking all the time and just hush your mouth, listen. He will give you instructions. He'll give you your next direction. He'll let you know who you're going to get ready to join to. He'll show him to you or she. Make sense? Two-way street. Communication is two-way. Don't always be the one talking all the time. Stop talking and listen. Make sense?
I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I do want to give you this. that regardless of whether you're actively dating, actively waiting, or married, there are a couple lessons that we learned along the way and want to share with you. Is that all right? All right. Number one is you got to learn to change your perspective. Like my husband says, sometimes we're so busy focusing on telling God, what's wrong with our spouse, what's wrong with this, what's wrong with that. What is right with it? God has done so much for us. And sometimes we got to just sit there and give him thanks for what he has done. He's done so much. So I can sit here now and I complain about not being a pharmacist, but I'm like, God, I'm here. I got breath in my lungs. My kids are alive. We're all in our right mind. Who walks away from being pharmacy and is able to go walk into a new house? God did it 2 weeks ago. Working as a pharmacist, we're like, okay, we need to save money for this, paying bills for that. Things were not working out. But then once it happened God's way, doors of opportunity started opening up. For me, that's it right now. Just sitting there thinking about everything he's done. 2, leverage temporary setbacks to your advantage. Sometimes God wants to make some situations so uncomfortable that you're willing to step out on faith and step into what he has for you. So instead of looking at, okay, God, that didn't work out. All right, ask him, what lesson were you to learn from it? Because sometimes we get tested on things multiple times. And God's like, okay, you didn't learn the second time, so I'm going to bring this full circle again, hoping that you've learned something from it. Now you take the same time. So start learning, you know what, I got to leverage that. I learned X, Y, and Z last time, so when that same test comes up again, you're like, okay, I recognize this. I tell my kids that when you get tested on certain things, I'm like, okay, now you remember you were tested on that before. What did you learn, so how are you going to respond now? So you have to start thinking about that. The third thing is listen to the voice of God in every situation. We talked about the red flags. Sometimes God is giving you red flags because he's like, I'm giving you an out. If you stay in that situation, that's not my best for you. I'm sending you notes. People will call you sometimes. Sometimes you're wondering why these things happen. God's trying to get your attention. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. Number 4, look for opportunities for growth. God wants to take you to another level, but you got to be willing to grow. And growth is going to be uncomfortable. Think about it. When we first get pregnant, you can't really tell anything. But as you start to grow, you start to stretch. That baby can't stay inside because he needs to grow and expand. So that it's going to be uncomfortable for a period of time, but it's going to be worth it. If that makes sense. And last, learn when it's time to pivot. I have been praying for the longest, wanting to be able to work with couples full time. And I didn't know that when God answered that prayer was going to be my walking away from pharmacy, my going through these medical challenges. But we had to learn when to pivot. With this pandemic, plenty of people, you have businesses. When God's saying, well, you can shift to online, you could do X, Y, and Z. And we were obstinate. We're like, nope, I'm comfortable right here where I am. And God's like, I have something else for you, but I'm going to need you to pivot. I'm going to need you to step outside your comfort zone. And then the pandemic happened, and what happened? Whether you wanted to shift to online or anything like that, you had to.
You had no choice.
So learn when to pivot. So we spent a lot of time talking with you guys. We hope that as we walk out of this door, that we left some nugget that's going to resonate with you, whether you're actively dating, actively waiting, or married. And just remember those 5 nuggets that we learned throughout this time. So Thank you so much, Pastor Chris.
Also, we did bring some resources, and this is another thing. You get the resources. We did bring some books and workbooks, so if you want to purchase it, we can provide that to you. Also, just remember the website. That's another resource for you. It's got plenty of free information on there. Marriagescanwin.com. We actually have dating guides on there for singles. We have free financial analysis. So that's a resource. The thing is, here's the resources. It's up to you. As we always end our shows and our conferences, we always tell you this. You have to be the change that you want to see in your relationships, but it begins with you.